You were drinking too much and got burned out on van life, and so your solution was keep drinking. I just need an RV.
My drinking is not the problem.
I need a bigger van. I want to apologize that the dog's in the shop today, but don't worry, we got a new orange dog for this video. Today I talked to my good friend Aaron, who I've known for 20 years. He's a big Hollywood set carpenter. Worked on the last 2 seasons of Reservation Dogs, which is arguably one of the best American shows ever made, and objectively super sad, funny. One of my favorites of the last couple years. But of course I don't bring it up even once while we're talking, because people might actually want to listen to something like that. And we have more important things to talk about, like orange dogs, the merits of a piss jar, the momentum one. Aaron's a pretty brilliant, awesome. Mostly we talked about Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the most ubiquitous recovery technology ever developed. And Aaron is the perfect person to give us a little more insight on AA because he is newly sober and extremely articulate and a brilliant dude. One of my best friends. I learned mostly about 12 steps through reading Infinite Jest, a book that I read when I was still drinking and using drugs, and then a book that I reread once I was recovered, and I got even more out of it.
It's funny that you mentioned Infinite Jest. I've had that book for like 30 some years on my shelf and have gotten into like the first chapter like 4 or 5 times and never gotten past that.
Sure. I have that with Gravity's Rainbow.
Yeah?
I think I've gotten 50 pages in several times.
I started going to meetings in 2017 at the suggestion of a couples counselor. And we were parsing through, these problems in my relationship, and the counselor said very matter-of-factly, well, "Have you ever considered AA?" And I was like, "Well, no, not actually."
Had you really not considered it at all at that point? Not even necessarily AA. Had you considered, do I have a drinking problem or do I want to quit?
Okay, I think that I had hundreds or thousands of late-night conversations with other people in various stages of their own reckoning with their substance problems, where you're trying to figure out whether you have a drinking problem while not wanting to actually come to terms with it and continuing to drink. So I think that, so many times throughout my 20s, when horrible things would happen, I would have the really difficult kind of like introspective moments where I'd be like, do I have a drinking problem? Am I an alcoholic? And I would always find a way to convince myself that I didn't, or that AA or 12-step recovery was something that was meant for other people, but not for me. And I think that I had a lot of preconceived notions that I carried with me from growing up about my parents were social workers, and I went to Sunday school in the same church basement where the AA groups were held, and all the banners and all of the 12 steps were hanging on the wall. Mm-hmm. So I got exposed to that stuff at a very young age, as an 8-year-old, seeing all of the 12 steps written up there, and smelling the heavy stale smoke smell in the air of St. Joseph's Church basement. And it's partially like a classist thing, where I, as a young person who was indoctrinated into being middle class, you want to you're led to believe that that's not for you, or that that's for other people who are really suffering or really struggling, or their lives are washed up and they're in the gutter, and you don't want to be that, and you don't want to identify that way.
I still have that. Everyone I run with knows I used to drink and do a lot of drugs, and now I don't.
You made it pretty clear in your fiction.
Yeah, and I've sung about it. I have made movies about it, and I'll talk your ear off, clearly. Now there's this show. But you know, I was just visiting family for the holidays, and I'm like, they don't know anything about this.
Yeah.
And it's because of that. It's kind of because, like, I still have this feeling of, like, they'd be disappointed in me or whatever. So it's like, even though I've come to terms where I'm like, it is not anyone's fault. The familial thing runs deep. And it is, you know.
100%. And I mean, now, I'm into my like 7th year on and off of being in and out of meetings and in and out of recovery. And I think that that's been like one of the central struggles is identification. And in 12-step circles, we call it surrender. And it's like a big part of the first step is that you like come to accept that your life has become unmanageable.
Yes,
and,
surrender.
And I really, really pushed back against the surrender. And like, I like to believe that I have grasped the concept and have like surrendered, but you know, I think time will tell, you know, if you have, and that comes out in the wash. I mean, if you're able to maintain your sobriety, that, you know, shows that you have been able to have adequately surrendered.
And the concept is so deep and people are so fluid. There's still room to grasp it, you know, when I'm a 50-year-old man.
Of course.
As opposed to a 41-year-old man. I got sober almost 8 years ago, seven and a lot of change.
Well done, man.
Thank you.
Really impressed.
I think like the surrender, powerlessness thing, it's really only been recently after 2 deaths and then like really getting lost in ambition and working on making a movie and stuff like that to really deflect a lot of feelings and stuff, that it was recently that I was like, oh my God, I need to surrender again. I never started drinking again. I didn't start using drugs, but like I was living my life like I had control and trying to grab on to control of everything, and it was destroying me again.
It's an ongoing process. And,
yeah.
And you're saying you're 7.5 going on 8 years sober, and you have to surrender. It's not a thing you do once,
right.
binary, where you're continuing to do it. And I think that I brought a lot of this baggage about, like, if you think about the word surrender, I would associate it with loss. If an army surrenders to another, you're thinking about them losing or
yes.
conceding some sort of defeat. Mm-hmm. Where I came to have a greater, more profound understanding of the concept, I think this go around of recovery, where it's like, I'm not surrendering in a type of defeat. I am like surrendering this like false notion of my individuality to a greater notion of my wonderful part of the whole. Mm-hmm. And I think that like the idea of like the rugged individual that is like cast upon us in like Western capitalism as being like the fundamental unit of like humanity, you know, that might not be the best way to go about things. And I think that probably plays into some of the poisonous behaviors that we've kind of fallen into over this time.
It's such a struggle to survive. It can feel paradoxical or counterintuitive to suggest like, oh, I just want to surrender myself. And it's interesting because it's like, I've been reading a lot about Taoism lately. That's been a philosophy for thousands of years of basically, you know, instead of looking at it as like giving up, it's more like just going with the flow. You know, it doesn't have to be much more complicated than that, really.
I spent so many years fighting so hard, fighting myself, my family, as they say, as it's written on the walls, there's an easier, softer way. It's funny how how much I hate, man, it's hilarious that I'm like, I'm repeating all these cliches, because it's one thing that has like kept me away from the rooms, or has made that I've had this allergic reaction to the sloganeering of AA.
Yeah.
And here I am repeating them.
Well, it's funny because since I didn't do AA, I love those things. Those things help. Like, I like it. I like having a thing because it's like,
easy does it.
You know what's cliche? The endless conversation of like self-hatred and loathing that fills my head normally. So it's like, I can replace that for a second with like a nice little saying that describes how I feel and how people have felt for 1,000 years. Like, that's not too bad.
Truth.
But I get it. Like, and I think that's some of the individuality that, that's hard to let go of, this, especially like for people like us who like, are artists and want to be original and authentic. That individuality is false. It is another cliche.
Yeah, it's funny. I heard it described recently in a meeting as bumper sticker logic,
Yeah.
which I really loved. And I, my second go around in recovery, I went to rehab and did the full like month of inpatient rehab, and as a part of that, they had this 7 a.m. meeting that was on the campus of Charter Oak. I refer to it as like a thumper meeting. Thumper in recovery is a big book thumper. So,
Okay. Yeah, like a Bible thumper.
Similar to Bible thumper.
Put a big book thumper.
Yeah, and the guy who led the meeting, it was the secretary of the meeting, was like, you can definitely be too smart for this stuff, but you can't be too dumb for it.
Yes.
And it hit, man. I would think my way around things and think my way out of things. And the more that I've reflected upon that, I kind of look at it as like my body and mind are like a host organism, where like, the addiction is able to like manipulate the host organism in a way to keep it sustaining itself. And I mean, it's why I was able to keep a job and actually thrive in a career.
Yeah. I feel like Norm Macdonald or somebody had a joke where they were like, I've become more diseased than host. I feel like really quick, I want to point out that this is not the orange dog of the other videos.
It's a different orange dog.
I love this dog.
I'm breaking all kinds of rules in recovery. It's like you're not supposed to make any like big like life decisions within the first year. And as a person who has a severe case of oppositional defiant disorder, I like to think of myself as an exemption, and
Sure.
that I'm too smart or special to follow the rules. So I, of course, went straight to the North Central Animal Shelter during their Home for the Holidays event and got a discount used dog. So, man, she's been fantastic for me. Like, I feel that she has been a positive. Yeah, I'm talking about you. She's been a positive tool for me in my recovery, in that, like, I don't know, she forces me to take 2 walks a day of at least 1 mile.
Yeah.
I get out of self. I'm taking care of another being.
Something that makes you shift your thinking patterns slightly, just enough, because it's like in No Country for Old Men, where he's like, if the code you've lived by has led you here, of what use was the code?
That's a wonderful quote. I forgot about that. So yeah, and I think that like part of the thing that has put us in the position where we've spent years in addiction is an eroded sense of self-worth and value. So I don't need to take myself for a walk. I don't need to make a healthy meal for myself. You have this other being that like you couldn't imagine. Like, look at that face. Look how cute. Look how cute she is. Like, I couldn't imagine not giving her kibble on time. I couldn't imagine not getting her out for her walk. And it's like, yeah, motherfucker, apply those same sets of logic and caring to yourself.
Yeah, and I think another way that helps people do that is helping people.
And that's a central tenet of the program.
Yes.
Is getting out of self by helping others. And there's no money, there's no dues or fees, and it's an entirely bottom-up anarchist collective, basically, of people helping one another and giving freely of what you have learned to another person. So, I think that when I first encountered it, my hackles were definitely raised in that it's a cult, and by certain metrics, it kind of is. But today, I just met for the first time with my new sponsor, and this is a person who is spending their time and energy to be present for me and my recovery. As I'm learning as I go along, it's just as important for them as it is for me.
Yes, totally. I mean, you've spent some time sober, but you're fairly newly sober again, right?
Yeah, I heard somebody's like, LA is a great place to get sober. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I've done it 3 times.
That's good. That's a good line.
Yeah.
But there's a feeling sometimes when you get talking about this stuff, you feel even more raw and vulnerable, and you want to apologize to your friends. And we're both sober right now. And if there's any luck, we'll be having this same conversation in 40 years. And I will be happy to do it then in any level of sobriety that either one of us is at.
Yeah.
Because this is what I like talking about,
Our decades-long friendship has provided us with the structure then that we're able to informally have these types of relationships. But the cool thing about AA, it's funny now, I've always kind of been an outsider within those those circles, and never been a big, as I said, thumper. But it's funny, within this conversation, I'm I'm the flag bearer of AA and all things AA, which is a hilarious turn for me.
That is well, it's cool to have both perspectives,
right? So within that community, they have built up an infrastructure that replicates the type of friendship that you and I have. You have newcomers and people who have more time will then help those new folks out. That is just meant to be an institutional version of the friendship that you and I have, where we're able to to help one another. Dog, Brian paid a lot of money for this microphone.
Don't chew the mic.
And we're gonna not have you chew on the mic.
Here,
Let's
tuck this on the other side.
We're gonna tuck this away here. Hey, whoa, that's a bad doggy. We're shooting a podcast right now. You're very cute, and I'm sure you're helping with engagement. I had a really nice meeting with my new sponsor this morning, and it's funny. It's so much like dating vibes, where you'll meet for coffee, and you'll talk about each other's day, and talk about your story.
Sure.
And it really is. I mean, so similar to dating, where it's you're going to be experiencing a level of intimacy with this fool that very few other people do. I mean, the expectation is that I call him every day.
Yeah.
And it's a thing that I have resisted. And I mean, I'm still bucking. And it's of all the things to me that sounds like dental surgery, of having to call a grown man every day and be still nothing happening.
I get that. I get it. I get the reluctance. There's a vulnerability to it, and an obligation to be present.
Yeah, and I understand the validity of it as an exercise, and that it's just widening the net of accountability that you're building for yourself.
Yeah.
My friendship with you is one part of that web of accountability, where I'm going to check in with Brian roughly once or twice a week, and talk about how we're doing. And I want to be able to do that, and I want to be able to have positive things to report to him, because I seek that validation.
Sure.
I want Brian to like think that I'm doing a good job.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be, whether that's the right reason or not, but like that vain part of my brain wants that type of validation. So it's like I think that type of like the institutional policy within AA of having a sponsor and calling that sponsor every day.
Yeah. I think us as like Midwesterners, like we just don't want to be needy.
Oh, right.
Like we don't want to be burdensome. We don't want anyone to feel obligated to like present us with validation or something like that. And so it's hard to see sometimes, and I have this with a lot of friends, like if I don't know what's happening to you, then I feel like I have to look into it, and then I feel like I'm bothering you, sort of thing.
It's funny that you mentioned like our Midwestern like approach to life. I think that we have like trained ourselves in a way where it's like I'm not going to call and bother Brian about this thing that I can solve on my own. I'm going to save that call for when I'm prepared and actually need his help. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a valid thing creatively. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be pestering your friends or your creative collaborators with trivia or things that you should have been prepared for, because there's nothing worse than showing up for a shoot and somebody hasn't figured out where the lights go.
Yeah.
It's like, man, and that's happened 1,000 times where it's like, okay, don't make me come and wait for you to figure out what the next line in the script is.
Right.
So I think that what we've done is because we've trained ourselves over time to be like, I'm going to be prepared and I'm going to only bother my friends. I even note that I even said bother.
Sure.
Note that I'm going to only bother my friends about something once I'm prepared and ready and have my shit figured out.
And when you apply that to life, it's like part of figuring it out is just having like little conversations now.
It really is. And it's taken me a lot of untraining and breaking that down to just call you or call my brother or call another one of my friends and be like, I'm struggling with this. This is what I'm trying to figure out. I'm suffering right now. Because it's like, you don't want to call someone and tell them that you're struggling.
Yeah.
And especially like thinking about the way that we communicate now through social media or things like that, where it's like it's a presentation of self that is happy and successful.
Yes.
To reach out and say that you're struggling or suffering is contrary to that like PR where you're like trying to keep up your like personal brand of a successful, happy human being.
Sometimes I feel like everything is so structured. People are like, I have therapy where I talk about my problems and myself and stuff. And, I have social media, and then the other times I am at work.
Right. And I think that like that compartmentalization that you brought up is really important to recognize, because I think that like it's encouraged. It's encouraged that we compartmentalize ourselves to like work, social media interactions, therapy, those types of things, because it makes us good earners and it keeps us within a definable kind of space.
But then on the other hand, it is good to get yourself in the practice with something a little more regulated, where it's like, call your sponsor every day. Get in the habit of doing that so you have the language to call, and it doesn't feel like a big deal to call when you're like, you know what, I'm not feeling too good today.
Right. I find that like recovery has been really good for me. I talk with my parents a lot more, and I'm like more comfortable doing that.
Sometimes I am.
Sometimes.
No, I feel you.
I'm more comfortable having an uncomfortable conversation at work, in my romantic life, in any type of space that I'm in. You have a type of fluency with your emotions and with discomfort. I think is the important thing, because
you're more chemically even keeled.
I wanted to think about like, it's called the gift of desperation. In the olden days of AA, they would tell you, come back when you lost your watch, or you're not ready, and that like you have to go through the wash enough times until you've hit, the concept of rock bottom. And, in a lot of ways, I am what they refer to in recovery spaces as a high bottom drunk, because, I still had a job. I haven't alienated all of my friends.
Yeah.
So like in a lot of ways, I didn't hit a lot of the qualifications of rock bottom.
I was kind of the same way on the surface, and it was funny then explaining to people once I was like a month sober, and they like actually learned about what my private practices were kind of like.
Oh yeah.
Or how many substances I was on often while we were hanging out, and they'd be like, whoa.
Well, because a lot of when you're in active addiction, it's a fucking part-time job to keep up the veil of normalcy, and keep up this idea of being like an okay person while you were deeply not okay.
Yeah.
And like, so you've done a lot of work. You've done a lot of work to your coworkers or family or whatever to be like, yeah, shit's cool. I'm just fine.
It's easy to feel like, well, without a rock bottom, I can just keep doing this sort of thing. Like, without driving your car through a convenience store or,
it's funny. But like, even though I haven't driven a vehicle through a convenience store, part of my story involves drunk driving and having very scary and traumatic automobile accidents. It seems crazy now that wasn't like a wake-up call to be like, this shit has to stop.
Mm-hmm. It's a weird balance of not like feeling so much shame and accepting that like you were living a diseased lifestyle and it's not your fault. I fundamentally believe that, accepting that, but at the same time, hanging on to how it felt and feels to have participated in this kind of thing, to hold those two truths in your brain is like part of recovery.
I'm coming to better understand that addiction is a family disease, that it's a cultural disease. If you look at on my dad's side of the family, there are 12 of us cousins. 6 of the 12 of us are addicts. That's a family disease. And like that is a product both of our genetic makeup and our nurture. And then you broaden out that lens past the family to like the culture. And I saw somebody put it recently, whereas like addiction is a necessary component of the empire.
Yeah.
And like we're living inside the Death Star, and it's like you don't want people to understand that the Death Star is the Death Star and that we're turning the crank on it.
Yeah.
That they have to be numbed at every turn. So it's like, it's crazy that here we as addicts are viewed as outliers.
I think that makes sense in a capitalist society that demonizes being poor as well. If people attach morality to something as completely out of control as like your economic standing in this awful system, then it's like, of course they're also going to attach morality to the ways that you choose to cope.
As I've like reflected back on my time living in a camper on the streets in Los Angeles, I was living in a stable apartment with my long-term partner.
Yeah.
And my relationship ending was a direct product of my alcoholism. And when that relationship ended, I decided to move out of that apartment and move on with my life. And I felt that the best thing for me was to live in a camper. And at the point when I moved into the camper, there was a housing crisis that was beginning in Los Angeles. And to rent a 1-bedroom studio apartment, I was looking at like $1,800, $2,000 a month. And for me, I could buy a camper for about $4,000. I think I paid for that camper. So I was like, wow, that's 2 months worth of rent.
And it's on wheels.
It's on wheels. I can go wherever I want.
Yeah, that's one element of it. I don't want to tie it to something as deadening as addiction.
No.
It's not the same. But I sometimes feel like when I think about Matt sleeping in Griffith Park and I think about you living in a camper,
Same.
it was like an escape from these obligations that can feel oppressive.
I think that there was a lot of romanticism that I placed in living mobily and like living out of, at first it was a van and then a 1973 Winnebago camper.
You were living in a van for a bit?
I lived in a van. Oh man, it was a shitty 1976 Ford. I mean, it looked like a helmet, like an extruded helmet.
What was your setup?
Oh man, it was gnarly.
Do you have a bed?
So I bought a van off of Craigslist. I had grand visions of this was right in the like hashtag van life thing kind of popping off, and I was going to live my vanniest life.
Hey,
and you know, as a carpenter,
right?
I was gonna like pimp this thing out.
Yeah,
I had drawings of my integrated like kitchen setup that was going to become a little office.
Sure.
And because I was just drinking every day, that plan didn't really come to fruition. So I got as far as putting a fucking plywood floor in the bottom of it. And it was just plywood, and that was it. I had a piss jug, a water jug, and a hot plate, like the one that you get at the grocery store with the little butane thing. That it was a fire trap. It was the most unsafe, unsanitary, and I remember how embarrassed I was when my brother came to visit me in the van, and he stuck his arm through one of the holes in the. In the outside of the holes? Oh, there was just holes in it. It was like exposed. You wonder why I could barely sleep at night because I was so paranoid.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, my life was in such shambles at that point that I wasn't able to follow through any of the dreams or the ideas. So when I moved out of that apartment,
and you had the resilience.
Hell yeah.
The resilience of an alcoholic.
Keep doing
there were so many awful living situations. Be like, this is fine because I'm just going to be drunk every night. On those early tours, it was that same way where you'd stay in the worst apartment with the craziest, most awful people and
sleep behind the stage at Super Happy Funland.
Aaron and I toured together a lot with Everything is Terrible, but I remember one time I was sleeping on the floor. It was the morning, and some guy literally stood over me, stood like a foot on either side of me, straddled me, leaned over, and hit a bong over me before he went to work. That's how I woke up. But yeah. So you're living in a van, you're drinking enough to be okay living in a van, and then too much to actually make it a comfortable living situation.
Right, and it's it's a really poignant metaphor for what your life and what ugly late addiction is like, where it's you have dreams and a vision for what your life would be like, but your drinking and your disease just chews away and erodes that, and there becomes a really ugly disconnect between what your ideas and your values and your sense of who you are or should be in the world versus what actually is the case.
Yes.
And that fuels the cycles of guilt and shame that then fuel your drinking even more. So I would just every night it was 4 to 6 tall cans in the back of that van, and I got burnt out by the mattress on. It was a 3-inch Walmart memory foam mattress on the plywood floor.
Sure.
And I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
So I gave my redacted friend the van. He got deported. And because I was such a mess, never filed the DMV paperwork to relieve myself of the liability of this van out in the world that got impounded, and then I was haunted by $1,000 tow truck bill. Deeply embarrassing. I don't think I've told this story to many people because, you know, you want your hashtag van life story to sound a little bit better, but mine was really, really kind of
dark.
Sad and dark.
That's dire. Where were you staying then? Did you get an apartment for a bit?
No, I was staying in the van.
Yeah.
Grew tired of sleeping on the memory foam mattress on the plywood floor. Found a proper RV.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's the way I remember it.
That's how it went down. Found a proper RV on Craigslist, then gave the van to Redacted.
You were drinking too much and got burned out on van life, and so your solution was keep drinking. I just need an RV.
My drinking is not the problem.
I need a bigger van.
You know, it's the size of this van. It's not me. It's not my actions or my behaviors. It is. So yeah, man, I scored a way better RV and gave the other one away. This thing, the RV was actually kind of cool. It was untouched from 1973. A family out past Santa Clarita had been living in it. They lived in it when their house was burnt down in one of the wildfires. They had been holding on to it for a little while after they had rebuilt their house, and they sold it to me for $3,800 on Craigslist, with the condition that I wasn't going to gut it and I would keep the interior cherry.
Huh.
Oh man, it had blue high pile shag carpet.
Huh.
It had these like eagles with like a level on it so you could tell if it was parked. It was
I thought you were gonna gut it.
Oh, that I did. There was no like legally binding contract. I honored that by living in filth for a year plus. I only upgraded it once I stopped living in the filthy 1973 camper.
Oh God! So then, how long were you you were in the camper for over a year, right?
I was in the van for probably 2 months, and then the camper for just over a year.
And this was in Los Angeles.
Yes, living in Los Angeles.
You're
2017 to 19.
How often did you have to like switch parking spaces? There's street sweeping signs in Los Angeles. I mean, you can find places without it.
My general like rule of thumb was I would try to move every 3 days, but I got lazy and I got comfy.
Did this have a toilet?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so were you using the plumbing?
You know, I would try to limit my use of the toilet, because that was the most challenging aspect of living in the damn camper in the city, was emptying your blackwater tank. To bring this back to like how the camper served a role within my addiction and my late stage addiction, it was the ultimate isolation machine.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think of that.
So it's like, okay,
totally.
I mean, you're totally right in that, like, I moved into the camper because I liked the romanticism of it. I liked that I could, like, I was living on the fringes of society. And even though I, as a union carpenter, had the agency or the means to have a sticks and bricks apartment, I didn't want to fucking do that. I didn't want the accountability at that stage in my addiction. You know, if I like move in with family or friends, they get to see the really ugly behavior. Yeah. And they get to see behind the curtain of just how ugly and sad my life had become. Yeah. So if I do this thing that on paper is this really cool romantic thing and I look like a cool tough guy, I'm going to do that because you're not going to see just how sad and lonely my life is. Mm-hmm.
There were so many negotiations with myself about keeping the addiction going. If I live in this really crappy apartment that won't be comfortable and I'm sharing it with one other depressed guy, and it's a 1-bedroom, but we'll switch off the couch and the bed now and again. That means that I'll be able to afford to live this stupid, crazy lifestyle longer.
Right.
Like, I'll be able to go to the bar. You know?
And I think it reinforces and perpetuates the dirtbag narrative.
Yeah.
Like the apartment that you were describing.
Sure.
I'm not worthy of having a nice, clean, safe place to live where I can take care of myself.
Yeah. Now, Katie and I talked a little bit about like the passive suicide of substance abuse. I mean, what is life other than experience and being in a community with people and stuff? So it's like, if you're escaping your emotions, your friends, everything, then it's like you're basically slowly just trying to step away from life.
There's recurring themes that come up in people's shares in AA, and so frequently you'll hear people share when they're talking about their like experiences of like late stage addiction is like, I didn't want to kill myself, but I really didn't care if I died. And I think that that's such a common feeling. You hear so many people sharing those sentiments, and it's so sad. And it's like, you don't realize how incredibly sad that feeling is when you're living it. But then when you get a little bit of critical distance from it and start giving yourself a little bit of that self-worth back, it just feels so insane. And I think that like living in a camper, you know, I just really didn't care.
Yeah.
I didn't really care about how I was treated or what, you know.
That's a great way to put it.
Whether I had a good place to sleep or night. And like that camper, yes, did cost less than 2 months rent in a city with a housing crisis. But what you don't think about is the amount of stress that I endured, worrying about what was going to happen to me at night, worrying about interactions with the police, worrying about interactions with like angry neighbors.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like one thing that's like common in almost every form of addiction is like somebody tells me they have an addiction problem, I can probably say, I bet you don't sleep well.
I discovered that I have sleep apnea around the same time that I came to grips with my alcoholism. And I'm learning all this stuff in the same time that I haven't slept well for decades. And my body and my mind had not rested for decades.
Yeah.
Because I've been sleeping off hangovers every night.
Yeah.
And even if I weren't drinking, heaven forbid, was not sleeping well because of the way that my body was made. I lost all of my hair because I got alopecia, and I went gray all of a sudden. I don't know if I would have paid attention to this shit had my body just not started falling apart.
Sometimes I start to think about the passive suicide. It's such a weird chicken or egg thing. I feel so shitty. My life is falling apart. I feel like to not kill myself, I am drinking constantly or doing drugs constantly or both. And then you get some space from it, and it's easy to then just say, well, the drugs and the drinking is what made me want to kill myself. But it is more complicated than that.
Much more, you're right.
In a way, the drugs and alcohol kept me alive.
100%.
In another way, they were feeding my suicidal ideations.
I hate it. The Simpsons covered it, and in Homer, alcohol is the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
Right.
And I mean, the episode where Homer gets sober, I think about that so much.
I have to rewatch that.
You really should. Because he like immediately like loses like 20 pounds, is like reciting poetry and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And my brother will joke. He'll bring that episode up with me and joke with me about it, how I am like sober Homer, and like I'm like so much like immediately sharper, immediately better in conversation.
It's so cliche and it's so true.
It really is.
There are times I saw somebody once on the street, my friend, and she just looked like $1,000,000.
Yeah.
Was like, oh my God, you are so noticeably like more alive.
right now, and it was just like, yeah, I quit drinking like a year ago, you know, and it's always just like, I know. I just knew. I knew. Like,
it's pretty fucking sick. Oh, I stopped giving myself a low dose poison every day.
Totally.
Oh, that's why you look like you're not dying.
Totally. And because it's like a domino effect. You get rid of that, and then it's just like, you know, I'm not okay with these health problems. I'm going to like change this up a little bit. And then it's like, you know, I'm having like all these conversations with people. They're connecting with me more and treating me like someone to talk to.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. We talked a little bit about like how helping people helps. Not only are you not burdening somebody by talking to them, it feels so good when somebody like actually treats me like I might be able to help them.
Yeah.
You know?
I've had the opportunity to lead now 3 AA meetings. And it's a really wonderful exercise of introspection to lead a meeting, because in order to do so, you share your story. Mm-hmm. You share what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. Mm-hmm. And it's very much similar to what this exercise of our conversation is like what it was like. You know, I drank every day and was living in a camper. Mm-hmm. What happened? That camper was parked across the street from a rehab. Seriously, it was really parked across the street.
Listen, this is why I say we are powerless.
And like the disconnect between my like romantic vision of what that chapter of my life would look like. My idea is like, I'm going to be living off the grid as this rugged individual. Like, I don't need all these things. I don't need your apartment.
Right. And instead you're like shitting in Starbucks more often.
Or putting a Super A bag inside the toilet. So the shit and the toilet paper goes in the Super A bag, carefully avoiding pissing in it, because that's what the jug's for. And then you wad it up just like a dog, and you walk it out to the garbage can and put it in the garbage can like a grown-up. Don't go to Starbucks.
Off grid, baby.
Off grid, living the life.
I remember when you went to rehab, and I remember that you were living in the camper at the time.
Yeah.
Did you go back to the camper as a sober person?
Oh, that's a really good question. I was ready to. Mm-hmm. So like, I remember the conversations with my caseworker where they do this whole thing about like, what's your exit strategy?
Yeah.
So I did the full inpatient rehab as long as my insurance would cover, you know, and I didn't pay a nickel for it. My insurance paid the whole thing, which is good. I mean that's the way it should be for everyone.
Yes.
And like, the fact that I'm recognizing just how incredibly privileged I am to be able to be sane enough to have this conversation right now, because I got the help that I actually needed.
Yes.
And how rare that is for someone to be able to have that opportunity. I mean, there were folks that I was in rehab with that were paying out of pocket like $25,000, you know, saving up pinching pennies, doing GoFundMes to go to rehab to get well.
If these companies can make the money that they make off of beer and liquor,
oh yeah,
like the least they could do is pay 25 days of just somebody like giving you a little bit of a hand while you like detox from the substances that they're making billions of dollars off of.
Yeah. So to answer your question,
did you go back?
Did I go back to the camper?
Yeah.
I tried my best, but I was pushed kicking and screaming into a sober living home. Man, it was a tough stretch.
I bet.
There's a cliche in the rooms of like going to any length, or half measures will avail us nothing.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and it's really good, man. Bill Wilson that wrote a snappy book.
Yeah.
When someone in your support circle, be it your counselor or your sponsor, guides you to do something, you take that guidance. Mm-hmm. If someone asks you to lead a meeting, you do it.
Yeah.
If someone asks you to make coffee, you do it. And again, that's where it kind of like the gray area where people, you know, thinking that AA or 12-step is a cult, because you're relieving yourself of the bondage of self. You're removing the self-will that has led you into addiction.
And justified it and rationalized it. And
the 12 steps are a suggested path of recovery.
Right.
So you are suggested to accept the next indicated action. So the next indicated action was to not live in a camper.
Sure.
And I just remember the look on my counselor's face when she's like, "So where are you gonna go after you get out?" And I'm like, "I'm going back into my camper." And she's like, "I don't think that's a good idea."
I wish I could shake her hand right now.
And she's like, "Well, we actually recommend that you do a stay in a sober living home."
Mm-hmm.
And and this is where it gets complicated, where
Yeah.
I'm grateful for my experiences there. I'm not grateful for the way that they treated a lot of people. You'll have grown men speaking about grown women as girls. It's a byproduct of like the dated way that gender is spoke about in the big book, and like referring to God as a him and all that horse shit.
Okay.
Which is one of my like main problems with 12-step recovery spaces is like the antiquated language. Shit was written in the 1930s. Another thing that I really did not like about it, if we're going to get into some of the negatives about some of these things, is like, because we lived in the house, we had to go to this big AA convention out in Palm Desert where they would put us all in vans. You had to go to every event so that they were all attended. And I just felt that put a really bad taste in my mouth for a lot of recovery and it pushed me away from AA, which I really have come to like lean on and really appreciate its role in my life.
Totally.
However, a lot of like sober living homes and a lot of unscrupulous recovery centers behave in a kind of shitty way that like reinforces a lot of like, I don't know.
Backwards ass shit.
Yeah. That had pushed me away from a thing that could potentially help me. And that's the thing with a lot of the old timers. And the old timers in the rooms are often the most backwards, are often the most racist.
Yeah.
But they also have really sound recovery and they have really sound program. And what I stopped doing was I stopped shopping for reasons not to listen to people, and I started shopping for reasons where we shared a common humanity and we shared common situations. And I've done better since I've started to open up my mind and open up my heart to just listening to people, even though I might not agree with everything that they have to say.
Right. Like as I said, I've been reading this book, The Philosophy of the Tao Te Ching, and so many really great mind-expanding philosophical ideas. And then, like, in one part, they're talking about how you need the death penalty in a society. You can take something from it without suggesting that, like, it is the gospel or whatever, Well, I feel like we had a great long talk.
I feel really honored to take part in it with you.
Yeah, it's been great. And as I said, our talks kind of inspired just doing this in general. And I'm sure we'll do it again, probably with less cameras.
Yes.
What a good guy. Believe it or not, we actually plan to talk a lot more about van life in this episode, but you get two guys in recovery together and the conversation tends to swing a certain way. But here's a bunch of RVs. Look at that one. Okay. Hot dang. Living mobily has always kind of been a big part of Aaron and I's dynamic. We travel together and everything is terrible for many, many years, probably partying a little harder than the rest of the gang. There's also Aaron who decked out my Honda Fit with a sleep setup and then went ahead and changed it so that it would fit in my 1996 Honda CR-V. I never tried to sleep in the city with it, but I did live in it for many months traveling around national parks, and it was fantastic. Thanks for listening. Ooh, look at these cool clouds back there. Very dreary and dramatic. And thanks to Aaron again for doing this. You're the best. Bye.